The Witch's Notebook. It started on an ordinary autumn afternoon, the kind where the wind whispered secrets through golden leaves and the sun cast long shadows over the sleepy town of Greystone. Amelia Clark had no plans for adventure that day. She was just another high school junior navigating the mundane dramas of adolescence, quizzes, friends, and the lingering dread of college applications. Amelia's life had always been predictable. She thrived on routines, kept her grades high, and avoided unnecessary risks. But as she biked home from school, her curiosity got the better of her. A shortcut through the woods, she thought, would save her 10 minutes. That decision, small and seemingly inconsequential, changed everything. The woods were dense, almost eerily quiet. Amelia's tires crunched against the leaf-covered path, and she glanced around nervously. The air was damp and heavy with the earthy scent of moss and decaying foliage. She wasn't afraid of the forest. She'd been through it before. But something about that day felt off. She nearly missed it. The faint shimmer of sunlight bouncing off something metallic buried beneath a cluster of gnarled roots. Slamming the brakes, she skidded to a stop and dismounted her bike. Kneeling, she pushed aside the leaves and dirt to uncover a small, rusted box. It was locked, but the hinges were weak with age. After a few hard tugs, the lid creaked open to reveal its contents, a tattered leather notebook with a faintly glowing sigil embossed on the cover. Amelia hesitated. Every horror movie and cautionary tale warned against touching mysterious objects in the woods, but her curiosity outweighed her caution. The notebook was cool to the touch, its pages thick and slightly yellowed with age. Strange symbols lined the first page, accompanied by scribbled notes in a language she didn't recognize. Flipping through, Amelia realized it wasn't just a journal. It was something far more sinister. The entries were written in looping cursive, but every so often, words in English emerged. Illusion, binding, flame. Beneath each spell was a set of instructions. The spells seemed simple at first glance, but their warnings made Amelia's stomach twist. Caution, may distort perception. Avoid eye contact with mirrors. Use only in moonlight. Her heart raced as she turned the pages. The final entry caught her attention. Do not attempt without proper preparation. The title read, Echo's Return. Amelia snapped the book shut, her breath coming in short gasps. What was this? A prank? Some weird historical artifact? A joke left by teenagers with too much time on their hands? Whatever it was, she couldn't just leave it there. She stuffed the notebook into her backpack, her fingers trembling, and pedaled home as fast as she could. That night, Amelia sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, the notebook resting before her like a forbidden treasure. The glow of her desk lamp cast long shadows over her posters and bookshelves. She hesitated, her fingers brushing over the cover before flipping it open again. Her logical side told her it was nothing, a relic of someone's imagination. But another part of her, the part she rarely acknowledged, whispered that it might be real. After all, the world was full of mysteries, wasn't it? She chose a simple spell to test. It was called Luminance, and its description claimed it would create a ball of light that floated in the air for a few moments. The instructions were straightforward. Hold an object with sentimental value, close your eyes, and recite the incantation 3 times. Amelia picked up her grandmother's old locket, a gift passed down through generations. She clutched it tightly in her palm, her pulse quickening. The words felt strange on her tongue, foreign and rhythmic. Lux ignis lumen vitae, ascendat nunc. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a faint warmth spread through her hand. Her eyes flew open as a small glowing orb hovered in the air before her, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. It illuminated her room with an otherworldly light, casting dancing patterns on the walls. Her amazement quickly turned to unease. The orb began to flicker erratically, growing brighter and hotter. The room filled with the smell of burning fabric as her curtains smoldered. Panicking, Amelia grabbed a glass of water from her desk and threw it over the orb. The light hissed and vanished, leaving a thin trail of smoke. Breathing hard, Amelia stared at the spot where the orb had been. Her curtains were scorched, the fabric charred at the edges. Her heart pounded as the realization set in. The spell had worked, but it hadn't been as harmless as she'd hoped. She looked at the notebook, now closed and innocuous on her desk, and a chill ran down her spine. The spells were real. Dangerously real. The next morning at school, Amelia couldn't concentrate. The events of the previous night replayed in her mind, each detail sharper and more terrifying. She avoided her friends, skipped lunch, and spent the day buried in her thoughts. By the time she returned home, she'd made up her mind. She needed answers. Pulling the notebook from her bag, Amelia flipped to the first page again. A single question burned in her mind. Who did this book belong to? And why was it hidden? Whatever the answers, Amelia knew one thing for certain: her life would never be the same. The events of the previous night left Amelia restless, her thoughts spiraling in endless circles. She couldn't escape the vivid memory of the glowing orb, the way its light had flickered and burned with a life of its own. The notebook sat on her desk, silent and unassuming, as though it hadn't turned her safe, predictable world upside down. By Saturday morning, Amelia couldn't resist any longer. If one spell had worked, what else could the notebook do? The lingering fear was no match for her growing curiosity. That afternoon, Amelia decided to delve deeper. She locked her bedroom door and sat at her desk, the notebook open before her. Each spell seemed more complex than the last, with cryptic warnings and elaborate steps. One, titled The Voice of Shadows, claimed to allow communication with the spirit world, but cautioned against prolonged use. Another, The Weaver's Web, promised to create an illusion so convincing that even the caster might struggle to discern reality. But Amelia's eyes were drawn to a spell marked with an ink blot and the word binding. The description was vague. To tether, to hold, to command. It sounded ominous, but Amelia interpreted it as something akin to summoning a small, controllable entity. Nothing too dangerous, she reasoned. The instructions were simple. Draw a sigil on the ground using a powdered substance, focus on the desired form, and recite the incantation. She grabbed a container of flour from the kitchen, figuring it would suffice, and began carefully tracing the intricate design on her bedroom floor. The sigil's lines were sharp and geometric, spiraling inward to form an angular star. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she worked. The act of creating the symbol felt strangely significant, as though her hands were following an invisible guide. Once the sigil was complete, she took a deep breath. Her voice wavered as she spoke the words from the notebook. Per vincula vitae et lumen noctis, adducite formam meam. For a moment, nothing happened. The room was eerily silent, the air thick with anticipation. Then the sigil began to glow faintly, its edges pulsing with an unsettling green light. The flower shimmered and shifted as though alive, and an unnatural wind swirled around the room, sending papers flying. Amelia stumbled back as a figure began to form within the sigil. At first, it was nothing more than a shadow, amorphous and indistinct. But as the light grew brighter, the shadow solidified into a small, cat-like creature. Its fur was blacker than night, its eyes glowing an eerie shade of gold. The creature blinked at her, tilting its head in a disturbingly human manner. Hi," Amelia said nervously, her voice barely above a whisper. The creature stretched languidly, its claws scraping lightly against the floor. "Well," it said in a voice smooth as silk, "this is unexpected. You're not what I imagined." Amelia froze. It could talk. "What are you?" she stammered. The creature regarded her with an almost amused expression. "A question with many answers, young caster. But you may call me Nyx. And you? You must be rather reckless to summon something without understanding the consequences." I thought. Amelia faltered, her cheeks burning. "I didn't think it would actually work." Nyx chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "And yet here I am. Lucky for you, I'm not the type to hold grudges. Still, I wonder what you plan to do with me?" The weight of her mistake hit Amelia like a tidal wave. She hadn't thought this far ahead. The notebook didn't mention how to reverse the spell, and Nyx's golden eyes glinted with an intelligence that unnerved her. "Can you go back?" she asked hesitantly. Nyx tilted its head again, this time with a faint frown. "Oh, I could, but wouldn't that be a waste? You've gone through all the trouble of bringing me here. Surely you have a purpose." "I don't," Amelia admitted, her voice small. She hesitated, unsure how to explain her actions. The truth sounded ridiculous even to her. "I was curious." "Curiosity," Nyx mused, "the root of every great discovery and every great disaster. Tell me, Amelia, are you prepared for the price of your curiosity?" Her stomach tightened. What price? Nix's grin widened, revealing sharp white teeth. Magic is not without cost, my dear. You borrowed power to summon me, and power always demands something in return. But don't fret, I'm feeling generous. For now, let's call it a favor ode. Amelia's pulse quickened. A favor? What kind of favor? Nothing too extravagant, Nix said, curling its tail around its body. When the time comes, I'll ask, and you'll deliver. Simple, isn't it? She didn't like the sound of that, but what choice did she have? Fine, she said reluctantly. But no tricks. Nix's laughter filled the room. Oh, Amelia, you're playing with forces far beyond your understanding. Tricks are the least of your worries. For the rest of the day, Amelia kept Nix confined to her room, unsure what to do with the strange creature. It prowled around, inspecting her belongings with a mix of disdain and curiosity. When her mom called her down for dinner, Amelia told Nix to stay hidden, and to her surprise, the creature obeyed. As she sat at the table, pushing peas around her plate, her mind raced. She couldn't tell anyone. Not her parents, not her friends. Who would believe her? More importantly, what was she supposed to do now? The notebook had opened a door she couldn't close, and the consequences were becoming clearer by the minute. Later that night, as she lay in bed, Nix curled up on her windowsill like a living shadow. The creature's golden eyes gleamed in the darkness, unblinking. You should get some sleep, it said softly. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, and you'll need your strength. Amelia didn't reply. She stared at the ceiling, her thoughts a tangled mess. She'd wanted excitement, something to break the monotony of her life. Now she had it, and it was terrifying. One thing was certain, she couldn't ignore the notebook anymore. It held secrets she needed to uncover, answers to questions she hadn't yet thought to ask. And whatever came next, she had a sinking feeling that Nix would be at the center of it all. The following morning, Amelia woke to the unsettling sight of Nix perched on her desk, flipping through the notebook with a claw. The creature looked up as she stirred, its golden eyes glinting with mischief. You shouldn't be touching that, Amelia snapped, sitting up in bed. Nix closed the notebook with an audible thud. And yet, here I am. Tell me, Amelia, have you figured out your next move? Amelia swung her legs over the edge of the bed, her head heavy with exhaustion. She had spent half the night wrestling with questions that refused to be answered. I don't know, she admitted, but I can't leave things like this. I need to undo what I started. Nix chuckled, the sound low and mocking. Undo it? You can't unring a bell, my dear. Magic doesn't work that way. Once you've opened a door, you have to see what's on the other side. Amelia ignored the taunt and pulled the notebook toward her. She flipped through the pages, searching for anything that might help her banish Nix or at least contain the power she'd unleashed. Halfway through the book, her eyes fell on a spell titled The Seal of Shadows. It promised to bind a summoned entity and lock it away indefinitely, but the requirements made her stomach churn. A piece of the summoner's essence, blood, hair, or tears, offered willingly. Her pulse quickened. This was the answer she'd been looking for, but the thought of offering a part of herself to magic made her uneasy. Was it worth the risk? Nix seemed to sense her hesitation. Ah, the Seal of Shadows, it purred, slinking closer. A bold choice. But tell me, Amelia, do you understand what it means to sacrifice a piece of yourself? Magic doesn't just take, it changes you. Amelia clenched her fists. You're only saying that because you don't want to go. Nix's grin widened. Perhaps. Or perhaps I know something you don't. But by all means, proceed. I'm curious to see how far you'll go. Ignoring Nix's taunts, Amelia gathered the materials the spell required. A piece of chalk, a mirror, and a strand of her hair. The mirror, the notebook explained, would act as a prison for the bound entity, reflecting its form but keeping it trapped beyond reach. That evening, with her bedroom door locked and her hands trembling, Amelia prepared the ritual. She drew a second sigil, this one more intricate than the last, and placed the mirror at its center. Nix watched her every move, its expression unreadable. When the sigil was complete, Amelia stood at its edge, the strand of her hair clenched tightly in her hand. Her voice quivered as she began the incantation. Per umbras et tenebras, vinci nunc in aeternum, vinculum sanguinis, vinculum animae. The sigil glowed, brighter and more intense than before, and the air in the room grew heavy. Nix stood in the center of the symbol, its golden eyes fixed on Amelia. For a moment, it looked almost sad. You've made your choice. it said softly, its voice carrying a weight of finality. But remember, Amelia, every choice has a consequence. The glow of the sigil intensified, and the mirror began to ripple as though it were a pool of water. Amelia threw the strand of hair into the center of the sigil. The moment it landed, the room filled with a deafening roar, and Nix's form blurred, dissolving into shadows that spiraled toward the mirror. The surface rippled violently before solidifying, capturing Nix's image like a photograph frozen in time. For a long moment, Amelia stood in silence, staring at the mirror. Nix's reflection remained still, its golden eyes locked on hers, but it didn't move or speak. She sank to the floor, her body trembling with exhaustion and relief. It was over. The next few days passed in a haze. Amelia returned to her routines, but nothing felt normal anymore. The notebook remained on her desk, its pages untouched, and the mirror was hidden under her bed, wrapped in a thick blanket. She couldn't bring herself to throw it away. What if someone found it? What if Nix escaped? She told herself she'd won, but the victory felt hollow. Nix's words haunted her. Every choice has a consequence. 1 week later, the first signs of the price appeared. It started small, a faint shimmer in her peripheral vision, like shadows moving where they shouldn't. Then came the whispers, soft and indistinct, like voices carried on the wind. At first, Amelia thought she was imagining things, but the longer it went on, the harder it was to ignore. One evening, as she sat at her desk attempting to focus on homework, the whispers grew louder. She spun around, her heart racing, and saw nothing, just the darkened corners of her room. But when she looked at the mirror under her bed, she froze. The blanket covering it had shifted, and Nix's golden eyes stared out at her from the shadows. She grabbed the notebook, desperate for answers. Flipping to the page with the seal of shadows, she reread the instructions, her stomach sinking as she noticed a line she had missed. The seal binds not only the entity, but its connection to the summoner's soul. Beware, the tether is eternal. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. The whispers, the shadows, the uneasy feeling that had plagued her since the ritual, it wasn't her imagination. She hadn't just trapped Nix, she'd tied them together in a way she couldn't undo. From the mirror, Nix's voice broke the silence. I warned you, Amelia. Magic always has a price. Tears welled in her eyes as the weight of her mistake settled over her. She had wanted to fix things, to put everything back the way it was. But magic didn't work that way. Nix was part of her now, and no spell could change that. The notebook lay open on her desk, its pages full of secrets and dangers she would never fully understand. As she closed it for the last time, Amelia made a silent vow. She would keep the notebook hidden, protect it from others who might fall into the same trap. But deep down, she knew the truth. This was only the beginning. And Nix, bound but not defeated, would ensure she never forgot the cost of her curiosity. The shadows in her room deepened, and for the first time, Amelia wasn't sure they were hers alone.